Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Thank you. Can you feel the Holy Spirit right here with us now?
Yeah.
Awesome. And also we have Dr. Collins joining us today. So let's start with a little prayer. Gracious God, sometimes situations upset our equilibrium and inner peace. We thank you for inspiring us to gather today to learn about useful skills that can help us cope with stress and trauma in our daily lives. Dear Lord, please bless our conversation today as helpful and enhancing our spiritual resilience. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. To my left here, folks, joining us today is Dr. Linda Collins, a licensed clinical psychologist and marriage and family therapist. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And in her private practice here in San Diego, she specializes in integrating mind and body approaches in psychotherapy to work through modern life challenges such as anxiety, panic, post-traumatic stress, depression, relationship dynamics, stress-related physical problems, and life transitions. Dr. Collins trained with Dr. Peter A. Levine, founder of Somatic Engineering, experiencing an innovative form of therapy focused on treating trauma and stress-related challenges such as PTSD using bottom-up processing, looking to internal sensations rather than the traditional therapy focus on cognitive and emotional experiences. She is certified as a somatic experiencing practitioner and is active in this therapy, including training other healthcare practitioners in its benefits. Dr. Collins is also certified by the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center Mindfulness Facilitation Program as a mindfulness facilitator. Her websites share a really wonderful maxim: discover, heal, grow. Can you all say that with me? Discover, heal, grow. And with that happy approach to what we're going to learn today, Dr. Collins, we're very blessed to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I should also add to some information about myself. I am married and I have four furry friends. I have 2 horses and 2 dogs and 3 grandkids.
In that.
So maybe take a moment, because we're going to be, in addition to giving you information and getting to know our nervous system a little bit, we're also going to be exploring some practices that kind of bring us into our bodies. And so if we could take a moment and just arrive. And arriving by just taking a moment and feeling maybe your feet on the ground, feeling the seat underneath you and behind your back. Finding your breath for a moment. And arriving. And orienting to where we are right now. And we're going to be coming back to some of these practices, but it's a good way to start our discussion and to also give me a chance to arrive as well.
Did we get a mic for her?
Yes. I know I have a soft voice. So
Tell us more about your horses.
well, I have 2 Morgan horses. They're I actually inherited my horses from my mother, who was a longtime horsewoman. And when I'll tell you more about her unpredictable changes in her life. But when I moved her to San Diego, I moved her horses to San Diego and I took over the care of her horses. And then I started training, and because I'm a psychologist, thought, well, you know, I'm really curious about integrating contact with horses with psychotherapy. So that's what I've been training in. And I was
Maybe get you back. There's this goes here. That goes, yeah, underneath under in your pockets.
You have people come to your horses?
I do.
Wow.
I do. So, yeah, that's been a gift and as you'll see, a resource for me, as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about Carolyn, and I've been chatting for months about talking a little bit about really getting to know our nervous system and what is high stress and what is trauma. And we're going to be talking about what a large umbrella, of experience that represents. And we're going to talk a little bit about a process that has to do with how our nervous system responds to trauma or anything that's high stress. Process we call neuroception, which everybody should know about. And it's that unconscious process that assesses for, are we safe or are we in danger? And that's happening all the time, regardless of where our cognitive or our rational intention is. We're going to talk about the protective responses that neuroception automatically is wired, to direct us to do. And what happens if those protective responses don't get a chance to complete, and how that affects our nervous system, and how we can work with understanding that and work with some very practical wellness practices that really help with stabilizing and bringing us back into a sense of balance. Okay. So one of the things that Carolyn and I talked about also was this sense of that really the trauma of everyday life. And actually, there's a psychiatrist by the name of Mark Epstein, who you'll see on the slide. And he wrote a book actually called The Trauma of Everyday Life. And he says trauma happens to everyone. The potential for it is part of how the precariousness of life. We all want life to be normal, right? I went to a workshop once with a psychologist who gave us a handout. And the handout had 3 lines on it. There was a straight line, a curvy line, and a straight line that went through the curvy line. And she said, we're kind of rolling along in our life, and that's that straight line. That's what normal feels like. And then something interrupts that wave of, something interrupts that line that is unpredictable, that we didn't expect. So again, we're all traumatized by life in that way, by its unpredictability. The third line is was a straight line with a wave through it, and she said, this is when we all have to use our surfboards, to navigate the waves of life, of unpredictability. Life's randomness, the lack of regard for our feelings, and the losses that it brings. So we can all think of many examples of how life has touched us in a totally unpredictable kind of way. We don't have to look much farther than the pandemic that touched everybody's lives in ways that we could never have imagined. Everyday things like, I was talking with Paul and Carolyn a little bit about my horses earlier, and part of the unpredictability, I have a mother who turns 96 this year, and she was living, she built a horse ranch back in 1982 up in Inyo County, And she had horses, and I didn't live there, and I wasn't part of that experience. And in 2017, I started going up with my brother to visit her because she was beginning to get some dementia. And I got to know her horses, and with her, you know, with the contact, she and I decided it was time for her to move from the ranch she lived in for over 30 years and move to San Diego and find an assisted living facility that could support her. And so here, the unpredictability of life. You know, she moved to San Diego. She now is living very happily in an assisted living facility in the south part of the county. Occasionally gets to see her horses, but a huge change. Along with some of my clients, I have many clients who have unpredictable medical issues that come up that have changed, you know, what they expected they were going to be able to do, how they identified themselves. So in that way, we are all touched by the trauma of everyday life. And trauma can be triggered by, you know, a wide range of events. So it can be anything from life-threatening events that we more classically think of as trauma. It can be triggered by systemic oppression, you know, any kind of discrimination can create an interpersonal trauma over a person's lifetime. So it's interesting in this umbrella that we refer to as trauma. Peter Levine, who I trained with, who has been in the field for a number of decades, 4 decades, originated an approach to working with trauma, says that people can become traumatized by any event they perceive as consciously or unconsciously, either overwhelming or life-threatening, dangerous or life-threatening. We become traumatized when our ability to respond to a threat of any kind is in some way overwhelmed. And I had a really good time putting these pictures together. So you can see the frog confronting the donkey. A little overpowered.
What is it in front of the donkey?
It's a little frog. If you look really carefully.
Oh, there he is.
There's the frog. So we're going to talk touch on how common is trauma. So it's been estimated that 90% of the population has been exposed to a traumatic event. And of those 90%, all of us, almost all of us, somewhere between 8 to 20% of these people will develop post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that.
Where? How's that?
Great.
Nice catch, Pastor.
So one of the other things that we know, and that actually was started back in the 80s, was that there's actually an understanding the kind of widespread impact of trauma. There was a study that actually Kaiser and the National Institute of Health put together, and they surveyed like 17,000 participants. And what they found from the outcomes of the study, and these were like, people would come into Kaiser, they would give their permission to complete a questionnaire that had like 8 different questions related to potentially traumatic experiences, and specifically childhood experiences. And what they found was that 64% of the adults that they surveyed had at least one adverse childhood experience. And that those experiences, because again, they were surveying people in a medical facility, they were able to determine that those childhood experiences were correlated with the onset of chronic disease, mental health, violence, and being a victim of violence. If you have one ACE and one adverse childhood experience, that can result in 87% chance of having more, 2 or more. So the more ACEs, the greater the risk for the problems of health and mental health problems. So what happens when we are confronted with a threat? When our safety is threatened? And we couldn't think our way as fast as our nervous system is wired to respond. So the cycle, the threat response cycle, it's an automatic, involuntary, hardwired process into our nervous system. So when we are exposed to a threat, what do we, as well as all mammals, do? You can see the deer in the picture. We startle. We orient, which means we look around and we evaluate. Now, I mentioned I have horses. When I'm taking my gelding Star on a walk, and horses, you have to understand, are prey animals. So they go through this process all the time. They very, very dramatically and clearly go through this threat response cycle because they are always assessing clearly for safety and danger. So if I take a walk with my gelding and we walk by a pile of hay that wasn't covered by a tarp yesterday, but today is covered by a tarp, what will my gelding do? What will Star do? He will stop. His neck will raise. His ears will go up, go back maybe a little bit, and he will stop. And he will orient, and he will look around. What's happening? Is that haystack with that canvas tarp over it, is it going to hurt me or not? And it could be anything that wasn't there the day before. It can be anything new or different. So you can see it very clearly, the kind of arrest and startle, the orienting and evaluating. Am I safe? Am I not safe? So we are also hardwired to respond if our nervous system, and this is all part of our survival part of our brain that I'll talk more about. If the message is, I don't think I'm safe here, then we have 3 responses. And 2 of those responses we'll see is to respond with defensive and protective responses, or what we might know as fight or flight responses, right? If we are able to move away, move out of harm's way, or complete a protective response, or defend ourselves in some way that protects us, then the stress hormones that are part of how we mobilize a lot of energy to do that are released, and we return to a state of coherence, balance, normal functioning. However, if the brain doesn't get the message because there's in some way we were unable to do those protective responses, we were unable to do fight or flight, then what, what Dr. Levine discovered was that the body holds on to that high energy state. And this usually happens when the only choice we have is to freeze. And freeze these are evolutionary, hardwired responses we don't cognitively choose. It just is what happens. It's what we're wired to do. And that freeze state is a protective state. In fact, it's the oldest on an evolutionary, level. It's the oldest protective response that we have. It is the amygdala part of our survival brain that is responsible for response and memory of emotion, and especially fear. In that alarm center of our brain, that's the part of our brain that is like checking out the environment to see if we're safe. And it is kind of the more reptilian part of our brain that I'll show you in a second, that actually is responsible for sensation and regulation. So those two centers of our brain work together to result in how it is that we respond to cues in the environment, that in a hardwired kind of way, protective way. So again, this is kind of a little graphic about that, the three levels of our brain. And the limbic system, that area in green, is where the amygdala is. And the reptilian level that processes sensation, is responsible for arousal regulation, is that area in red. So I'm going to talk about neuroception, which everybody should understand what neuroception is. It is that capacity we have to process information that our senses take in from the environment, to evaluate whether or not we are at risk. It's actually a term that was coined by a scientist by the name of Stephen Porges, to talk about how it is that our neurocircuitry distinguishes whether situations and people are safe, dangerous, or life-threatening. And what's very interesting is that some of the ways that our neuroception is triggered is just part of our evolutionary wiring. But the other way our neuroception is impacted is by our own autonomic nervous system history. So whatever your past history has been with safety versus danger, there is an imprint in your system about all those experiences. And neuroception, that scanning the environment for safety, unsafety, is influenced by what happened before. And if that hasn't been worked through, it's very likely that sometimes neuroception can be faulty. In other words, it may, classic image, you've had a hiking experience in the past where you ran across a snake and that was really scary. And so fast forward, present time, it's dusk, there's a water hose coiled beside your house, you walk down your sidewalk by the water hose, and what do you notice? You startle. Now, what did neuroception do? Neuroception assumed that that coiled water hose was a snake and it could harm you. Was neuroception correct or incorrect? It was faulty. It was based on your past history. So we have to know that. And in my work, often with couples, neuroception, one's history with trauma or dangerous experiences or dangerous relationships or threatening relationships interrupts and influences responses to current day partners in a way that might not really belong to the partner at all. It can belong to a previous partner. But something about it might be, and we'll talk about triggers in a second. Triggers. So triggers can be almost anything that signals the possibility to our neuroception process of a traumatic or a stressful event. So it can be smells, it can be sights, it can be sounds, it can be touch, it can be body position. So let's say, you know, my couples, one couple, as they get into conflict, their voice starts to get louder. Maybe they grew up in a household where father was unpredictably reactive and got very loud and threatening when he was stressed or unhappy about something. So what is that neuroception? What is that imprint? What is that imprint that neuroception is then picking up on? Is, oh, well, if somebody's voice gets loud, you're in danger. So, you know, and it's a very fast process. So what we're going to do, so we're going to talk about, the good news is that we have a resiliency zone that we can support. And that resiliency zone, which is also known as our window of tolerance. And if you look at, so our sympathetic nervous system, which is what mobilizes it's our accelerator. If we need, well, we do this all day long. All day long, we have input from the environment. We have to take action. And it's our sympathetic nervous system, our accelerator, that increases our heart rate, you know, increases our, deepens our, or actually quickens our breathing, tightens our muscles, increases our blood pressure. All of those things the sympathetic nervous system is doing to mobilize us to be able to respond. And so we can see there's a charge, and ideally the way that we respond is we activate appropriately within a certain window, and then we respond, and then we release. And it is this kind of wave. That's the way our nervous system is supposed to respond. So what I'm going to do is I would like you to experience your window of tolerance, your resiliency zone. So what I would like you to do is I want you to take a few moments and revisit an experience over the past week where you felt most like yourself, most relaxed. It might be a particular situation that was particularly pleasant, relaxing, or just neutral. If you need to close your eyes for a moment, see if you can just take a few moments and see if you can invite an image of a situation or moment when you felt most like yourself, most relaxed, most at home. So I want you to check in with your body and notice for a second, can you notice a particular sensation that came up as you imagined that scene? Anybody have a sensation that you noticed as you imagined that scene? Yeah.
Just relaxing.
Relaxing. And how does relaxing show up in your body?
It's like no more tension.
Mhm. Yeah.
Happiness.
Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Happiness, smile on my face.
Yeah, you can feel a smile on your face.
No worries.
No worries. Yeah, yeah. And when you feel that sense of no worries, what do you notice in your body?
I'm relaxed.
You're relaxed. That's right. You're relaxed and calm. Yeah. Mhm. Anybody else? Yeah.
I've been having some lower back problems and I felt my lower back kind of relaxed.
Yes, yes. So isn't it fascinating that we don't have to, that we can actually just, we have a memory, just reflect on a moment that was particularly enjoyable, particularly relaxing when you could be yourself. And what you all noticed were some of the sensations that go with feeling safe and relaxed. And you're in your resiliency zone. So when you have a deeper breath, when you have a more even heartbeat, when you feel your muscles relax, when you feel more grounded and calm, those are all sensations that show up when we're in our resiliency zone. And it is in that kind of zone that everything works well together. Our thinking, our feeling, our sensations, they work well together and resource us to be able to respond to the moment, to the environment, right? To each other. So what happens when the experience of threat or the inability to respond, what happens to that window of resiliency? So you're going to see that you're moving along, you know, you're within your window, you're feeling that calm, relaxed, safe space, and something threatens that space. Something, you know, that you didn't expect, introduces a threat. And the inability to respond results in what we would call a dysregulation of the arousal of our nervous system. Meaning that you can see that arousal, either we get overactivated, our heart rate, you know, increases. Even people will say, you know, my thoughts are racing, my heart rate is increasing, I'm having trouble breathing, my chest is tight, the blood pressure goes up, and digestion changes. All that is when we're in a high activated, overactivated place. Our nervous system is dysregulated. Or if you look at the line that goes below the line, or everything shuts down. So freeze, or kind of getting a little dissociated, a little bit not really there, is a response to threat as well. So I want you to do another experiential exercise. So I want you to close your eyes, or you don't have to. If the closing your eyes is in any way unpleasant, don't do it. Okay. So I want you to imagine that you are in your car on the way home from shopping or work, or maybe on the way here. You're feeling calm, you're looking forward to getting home. You notice that the cars in front of you are slowing down. You put on the brakes and you slowly come to a stop. You are in a traffic jam. You can't see the cause of the jam because it's too far away. And you're just sitting there. You have a place to go and you can't go. And you have no idea when you will be able to go. Now, I want you to know, and this is a very, very small drift. But I want you to notice as you imagine that scene, and I'm sure you've been in scenes like that, notice what sensations come up in your body. If you just spend a moment with those images, I'm stuck in traffic. I can't move, but I have somewhere to be, somewhere to go. So open your eyes. Feel your feet on the ground. They're not there. But what did you notice as you even imagined that scene? Anybody have a sensation, a different sensation that came up? Yeah.
Immediately, my mind started searching for something to think about that wasn't boring. Like, I'm like, do not want to be bored.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm seriously looking for a song or a
Uh-huh.
problem to solve or.
Sure, sure. How can I entertain myself
Yeah,
on this
like-
journey? Anybody else have a sensation that you noticed?
It's happened so often, it's kind of like.
Right. So what we might notice is that when different from the resiliency zone sensations, that when we're in a high stress or trauma experience, that we might experience a constriction of breath, rapid heartbeat, tense muscles, pain, numbness, spaciness, floatiness. You might think, like, what might knock you out of your resiliency zone? And what are your common triggers? Knowing your common triggers can be really helpful, because you can recognize and then know how to support yourself and to helping get back into your resiliency zone. So we are going to really look more closely at what are the practices that we talk about in terms of what helps us back into our resiliency zone. This is really helpful, whether it's just a stress, you just feeling mildly stressed, moderately stressed, very stressed, or you've just been through a traumatic experience, and or you're helping somebody else who's just been overwhelmed. It might be, in that umbrella of types of trauma, things like falls, automobile accidents, medical procedures, anything unexpected can trigger the nervous system to mobilize, to protect us, and increase, but throw us out of our sense of being able to use all of our resources in a resilient way. So we're going to learn some resiliency skills. What these resiliency skills do, one of the things that they do, is to move us to shift our attention away from sensations that are associated with trauma or stress, back to neutral or pleasant sensations. Now, that's not the end of the story in terms of resolving trauma, but it is a way to titrate and come back into some stabilization in order to take care of yourself. And sometimes, as we'll talk about, the reorganization, the reprocessing of trauma, that capacity to be able to move out of high overwhelm, too much, almost a sense of re-traumatization it's really helpful to have these stabilization skills. So the first one is orientation, which we did a little bit of at the beginning. So what I want you to do is to practice that now. Orientation is actually a mindfulness skill. It is the ability to look around and see where you really are and see where your eyes are drawn. They might be drawn might be drawn to the flower on the slide. Or they might be drawn to the light outside or the warmth of the wood in the room. I don't know, but take a moment and see what attracts your attention. What are you drawn to? And as you are drawn to something of interest where your eyes want to go, take a moment and notice if there is a body sensation that comes up as you look around and land on something that is pleasant, that attracts your attention. And maybe just noticing, doing a little bit of body scan. Noticing your feet, noticing your legs, noticing your chest area, noticing your breath. And anybody notice a sensation as you orient that comes up as you kind of practice orienting to the room? Yeah.
It slowed my heartbeat.
Okay. So notice that just by looking around and seeing where you are right now and noticing where your eyes want to go, that you're already introducing some stabilization in your nervous system. Your heart rate slowed down. Anybody else notice a sensation? Yeah.
Release.
Say it again.
Release.
Release. And where did you notice that in your body?
Shoulders keep down, muscles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Muscles softened a little bit.
And breathing slow.
And
Breathing.
and breathing slowed. Yeah, isn't that interesting? That you can practice. You can practice orientation. Nobody has to know you're doing it. You can practice orientation anywhere, anytime, any place where you're feeling just a little bit rattled, a little bit activated. Can you look around and see where you really are? That's orientation. So again, these are skills that can be used for the purpose of preventing overwhelm. They can also support the nervous system to return to stabilization and increased resiliency. Let's look at another one. This one is called interoception or tracking. So interoception, actually, this is a very interesting skill and one that we often don't really get any practice at intentionally noticing. Interoception is considered the 8th sensory system. Any of you who've been or are physical therapists or occupational therapists will know this term. It allows us to feel our internal organs and our skin and give us information regarding the internal state or condition of our body. It's called interoception. The interoception system helps us feel many important sensations such as like pain, temperature, body temperature, itchiness, sexual arousal. It helps us to sense a variety of general and localized feelings. So I'm going to give you an experience to do. We're going to go on a sensory treasure hunt. I want you to find a part of your body that feels warm. Let's notice a part of your body that feels warm. See if you can find a part of your body that feels cool. Part of your body that feels cool. a part of your body that feels soft. See if you can shift and find a part of your body that feels firm. Part of your body that feels light. A part of your body that feels heavy. A part of your body that feels open. A part of your body that feels a little constricted, tight. And a part of your body that feels relaxed. You can open your eyes. How was your interoceptive skill? How was it to track those internal sensations? Was it something that came easily? Was it something that was kind of hard to find? What did you notice? What did you notice, Paul?
Easy.
Easy. You could find internal sensation. Yeah.
I noticed once again how judgmental I am.
How did that show up?
Well, you know, I say to my hands, you ought not to be cold.
Right,
They're
right.
like,
Yeah.
sorry.
So isn't it interesting, from a mindfulness perspective, when you're practicing tracking, is just noticing what's happening without judgment. Just noticing. It's part of healing trauma, is being able to track pleasant and unpleasant sensations without judgment. Finding that kind of internal witness that can step back and just notice. That's a skill. It's a skill that if you practice meditation or prayer, it strengthens that capacity to be with what is in the moment without judgment. So the next resiliency skill is called resourcing and resource intensification. So resourcing actually means focusing on positive things in your life and tracking the positive sensations in your body that are connected to those people or those places or those things. External resources might be things like a positive memory, a place, spiritual guides, activities, animals, skills, hobbies. They can include internal things like something you value, generosity, kindness, courage, experience of patience. They can be anyone or anything that helps you feel better, that provides you with comfort. So we're going to do an experiential practice again. So what I want you to do is close your eyes if that's comfortable. I want you to think of one of your resources, something that makes you feel good, that provides you with comfort or joy. And then I want you to think of 3 or more details about that resource that you're thinking about. And as you're tuned into your internal experience, what do you notice about your heart rate, your breathing, your muscle tension as you tune into your resource, the details of that resource, and how it is to just hang out with that? How does that land in your body? or show up as an emotion. Or create an image. So you can open your eyes and maybe you could share a few moments of what were your resources? Anybody have one? Yeah.
I'm a wheelchair dancer, so dancing.
Okay, dancing. Oh, very cool, very cool. And as you think about, or as you imagine dancing as your resource, any sensation that came up in your life?
Happiness, I love doing, I've been doing it for almost 20 years.
Wow. Yeah.
It's great.
And when happiness shows up, how do you know you're happy? How does it show up in your body?
Well, laughing,
Yeah, so that was behavior as a smile on your face. Yeah. Anyone else? Would you identify as a resource? Yeah.
this is so silly, but the hum of my refrigerator, it's the oddest thing, but it really relaxes me.
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
uh-huh. Yeah, and how do you notice that relaxation?
I start harmonizing with the sound, like I'll pick out the note that it's on and go up or down or whatever and just be in my kitchen.
Uh-huh. And even thinking about that right now, what do you notice in your body?
It just makes me happy, like I want to dance.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else have a resource that came? I'll show you mine. Here's mine. So this is Star, and he's my gelding, and he's my resource. You know, during the pandemic, the only place I could really go where there were other people and there was like a sense of community was my horse farm. And, you know, there was a point early on that we wore masks, but most of the time people were with their horses outside, and it was the one place that, and I was in nature and one place I could go, you know, that felt safe. But Star is, he will turn 27 this year. He's a big guy. He's really a sweetheart, and he's taught me everything I know about horses. And as I said, he's the one that I walk around the horse farm, and when he sees something he didn't see yesterday, he will stop and go through his threat response cycle. Yeah.
Seeing that makes me a little emotional, because when I was a young kid, I used to horse ride, but I had a surgery that.
Okay, so it's kind of bittersweet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful horse though.
He's my sweetheart. Yeah. He's my resource. So another resiliency skill is grounding and moving. So even if you take a moment like I did with you when you first arrived, is just to feel your feet on the ground. And feel the support of the earth underneath your feet. Feel the support of the chair under your seat and behind your back. Just noticing what it's like to, you know, how your body is making contact with the earth in the chair. For some people, this is extremely supportive and comfortable. For others, it might not be. But notice when you do that practice of grounding, what happens? What do you notice again? What do you notice in your body? Are there images that come up?
Like an equilibrium.
An equilibrium. And how is that for you to experience an equilibrium?
It's nice. I don't like the sensation of falling, so.
So it feels supported and solid. Yeah. Anybody else? What happens when you practice grounding? What sensation? Maybe one sensation that comes up, or one image.
Stability.
Stability. Yeah. It's feeling stability. Yeah.
I have a much less busy mind.
So your mind slows down. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yeah. And moving, if you should feel, if there is a time when you're feeling a little frozen or a little shut down, move. Just move your ankles, move your joints. See how your body wants to move. If you've kind of, for some reason, gone into freeze or shut down, is just move. Is really, is really helpful. So you're seeing that the grounding comes with often, mindful walking, moving. Gesturing, it is very interesting. You may be doing it right now. Carolyn's doing it. I can't see everybody's hands, but people, we move into these automatic gestures sometimes without our awareness. And they're often a source of comfort. And so if you put your attention, like you might even choose a place that you would like, that you feel would be supportive. So either, your hands touching each other, your hands touching your chest, touching your belly, touching the back of your neck, your forehead, the sides of your cheeks or your shoulders. And just notice how that is, if you pay attention, how it is to feel one hand in the other. Secure. Yeah, and when you feel secure, what do you notice in your body? How do you know you feel secure?
I'm just like present in this time and place. My thoughts aren't racing, my heart's not racing.
Yeah, you're present. Anybody else notice as you focus your awareness, your attention on a gesture, on the way that your hand is laying on your lap or on your thigh, or touching one another, what do you notice? Anything that comes up? Yeah.
I've had some heart surgery and I don't remember before the surgery always doing this, but I tend to do this a lot
Huh.
automatically while I'm talking.
How is that for you? What do you notice as you do that?
Well, I'm thinking it's self-protective, but it's just so reflexive and I'm bored of it now.
Mm-hmm.
I would like not to be doing that so often, but boy, it's really there.
Well, and if we were working together, we would probably slow that down and just be curious about it. Might be part of a protective response. The next resiliency skill is tend and befriend. And I was speaking, I think, with Carolyn about the resource that you have here as a community to offer connection and safety and support to each other. That's one of our, the most on the evolutionary ladder, our most recent, capacity to feel safe, to protect ourselves, is to connect with others. So as you help others, as you ask for help, I have a lot of clients who they're great at offering, but they're not very good at asking. And that's a real, that's a resiliency skill, is to be able to ask for support. And we aren't supposed to go through challenges by ourselves. Pendulation, which is a resiliency skill as well, is the intentional shifting your attention from sensations of discomfort to sensations that are pleasant and neutral. So you can, if something feels extremely overwhelming or you have a really intense pain somewhere, you can shift your attention. You can pendulate. You can touch on what is uncomfortable, either emotionally or physically, and find a place in your body that has the opposite sensation. You are helping the body, and sometimes that's all the body needs to move back into a little more balance, a little more resiliency. So the last practice we're going to do, and then I'll open it up for some questions, is self-compassion as a emotion regulation practice. Actually, in the science of emotion, cultivating self-compassion can be considered an emotional regulation practice. It allows us to kind of lean into dysregulation, suffering of some kind, and to track what is occurring in the moment with kindness. So I want you to do this final practice. This is called the self-compassion break. You can do this anytime. So what I want you to do is, and I want you to, the first step of this practice is turning towards a difficult moment. And think of something that, you know, that it was just a moment of suffering of some kind. Could be on the low end scale. Just a moment of either frustration, sorrow, regret, just a moment of suffering. And just validate the difficulty of that experience for yourself. If that just means just acknowledging that was a moment of suffering. Just remembering it is a little bit of a moment of suffering. And then the second step, as you have your eyes closed and are like focusing on this moment, is to remember what's called common humanity. Remind yourself this is part of life, part of being human. I am not the only one who has felt this way. And then the last step is practicing kindness towards yourself. Engage in soothing, some kind of either supportive touch or some words of kindness toward yourself. What do you most need to hear? It might be, may I give myself the understanding and kindness that I need? May I learn to accept myself just as I am? May I forgive myself? May I be strong? May I be patient? May I believe in myself? May I treat myself just like I would treat a best friend? Or whatever words you need to hear. Take a moment with us. Bring yourself back to the room. And what do you notice? What do you notice as you just do a little small practice of self-compassion? What do you notice? Is that familiar territory for you? Is it something you would like to strengthen? How did it feel in this moment? To acknowledge a difficulty, remind yourself that of the sense of common humanity that we all share. This is part of life. And to send yourself a kind message. How was that for you?
Sad.
Sad? Yeah. And so continue to offer yourself some comfort, either by self-touch, by a kind message, by connecting with somebody. Is sometimes, yeah, touching into something that's been a moment of suffering can be hard to move away from. See if you can practice a resiliency skill to bring yourself back into this moment. That's no longer happening right now. Or even if a little bit of it is, can you send yourself a message, a kind message? What would be a resource right now if there's some of that suffering left over? So I'm going to open it up for questions as we end today. But anybody have any questions? Comments? Yeah.
I heard a burning sensation throughout the body can be caused by trauma. Like neurological pain. If that's so, is it something that can be treated without medication and can it heal itself over time?
I don't know if I can answer that question. The trauma healing practices are not so much about repairing or healing medical conditions, but they can heal because we're working with trying to stabilize the nervous system. And if there is a chronic response of the nervous system that doesn't release, then there are all kinds of difficulties that can cause in the body for different medical conditions. In other words, there can be too many stress hormones in the system. There can be a way in which everything in the body is braced and waiting for, anticipating harm, and that doesn't shut down, and that affects, how the body is functioning. So I don't know if, it depends on what that burning sensation, is about. It's not necessary, but certainly these practices working with healing trauma is certainly going to support the body's capacity to contribute to healing. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Question? Yeah.
Can we apply everything that we've talked about, not just to a sense of being unsafe physically, but emotionally?
Absolutely. Because threat, the experience of threat is, we experience it in all parts of our body, on a physical level, on an emotional level.
Is there a point where someone may have come under so much trauma that they can't recover? I think of children who've been abused, or soldiers who went to Iraq 7 times, and it's like, how do you overcome something like that?
So I work with a lot of clients who, a lot of times, most of the trauma I work with is early development trauma. And it is a process of, what we've done is kind of learn some stabilization tools, learn what trauma is, learn what, how trauma is not the event, but what gets dysregulated in our nervous system. So part of the therapy, part of the healing process, in terms of using some of the skills that you have, is that you are supported to sometimes rework the body's response. So part of what's stuck in post-traumatic stress disorder is completion of protective responses, completion of discharge of energy. The problem of the past contaminating the present. So by actually working through, sometimes you don't have to even remember you know, what happened. You can work with early birth trauma, you know, but you're working with nervous system response. And you're not necessarily working with content. And that's part of why I got into trauma, this particular kind of trauma work in the first place, was that in addition to encountering a lot of people with trauma, what do you do with early developmental trauma where there isn't language, there isn't a memory, an actual narrative memory. We call it explicit memory versus implicit memory, which is the body's imprint of the experience. So, I mean, it's a process, and it takes a while. Complex trauma, which is multiple kinds of trauma, it takes a while to support the nervous system to be able to complete and release and reset. Any other questions? So let me stop. And lovely to share it with you.
So meditation really helps us.
It does, because, in many ways, one is the capacity to practice being present, practice tracking and experiencing what's passing through my experience right now. And I think the other two things that are really powerful about having a strong meditation practice is that you're developing that capacity to just notice, to not be in the middle of, be able to step back just a little bit and just notice what's happening with kindness. That's that self-compassion piece. Self-compassion is a great emotional regulation tool, because you're just being able to step back just a little and notice what's there without just jumping back, without getting on to the thought train, for example. Right. Okay, nice to be with you today.
Thank you.
Dr. Collins, please, thank you so much. You have brought so much to us. And for all of us, this has been taped and will be available somehow that the pastors will tell us about.
Yeah, we'll get it uploaded, and then with the doctor's permission, we'll find a way to share it with people. That's okay with you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're welcome. Okay. And thank you all for coming.
Absolutely. Get it.